You're listening to Your First 1,000 Clients with Mitch Russo. Welcome, listeners. Now, I want to let you know that today is going to be a different type of show. Instead of digging into tactics, such as how to get your sales team built or your website ranked, we're going to deal with the stuff of miracles, the strategy of success-oriented thinking. And with that in mind, there is no one more qualified to talk about the mindset of success than David Neagle. David is a best-selling author of The Millions Within and is known as one of the architects of the coaching and personal growth industry itself. His own coach, Bob Proctor, mentored David to an incredible level of success, and now he will share those secrets with us today. He's also worked with Marianne Morrissey and Tony Robbins, to name a few. David is the guy to go to when you've tried every strategy and you finally realize it's not your strategy that's an issue, it's what's going on between your two ears. That's the issue. David, welcome to the show.
My pleasure to be here, Mitch. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, David, what we like to do when we get started with someone or new guest on the show, we like to find out about their roots and where they've come from. And so, David, I know your story. I've been with you before in public lectures and classes, and I'd like you to maybe help our listeners get a feel for where you started when you first began this process.
Well, it's interesting because when I was a kid, I got moved around quite a bit. Like I moved like 21 times by the time I was 20 years old. And I was bounced around all over the place, came from a divorced family, pretty much grew up on my own on the streets of Chicago, and immediately decided that quitting high school at 17 was a bright thing to do, and started to go to work and started to build a family, and found out very fast that I had taken on more responsibility than I was actually capable of from a skill set or educational perspective of fulfilling. And found that everything was just falling apart. I ended up living next door to a drug dealer in a bad neighborhood. I was working 2-3 jobs along with my wife at the time in order just to make ends meet, which never seemed to really happen. But it wasn't a good situation. And I kept coming from this place in my mind of, if I had only done these certain things in my school days, then I wouldn't be in this situation. If I had went to college, if I had gotten good grades, if I had learned a skill set, if I had built a career and then done this, I wouldn't be in this trouble. But now I am. And here I am working on a dock, driving a forklift and driving a truck on the weekends. And I pick up about 1/2 a day off a week to do anything with my family at all. How do I get out of the situation? Because I didn't have the money and the time to do it. So that's where I started, and I had an amazing breakthrough just in changing a couple of things in my attitude. One night after just totally melting down on the dock and being reprimanded several times, and then just breaking into tears, and I was like, God, please just show me what is it that I need to do here. And a little voice in my head said, change your attitude, and It was almost audible, Mitch, that voice. And it was so pronounced that it caused me to sit up and pay attention to it and say, okay, if I did that, number one, what would it be? Because I wasn't sure what an attitude even was. And if I did do it, what would I change it to? And I identified 3 things really quick: that I didn't love what I did. I really could care less about the quality of my work. And I was so angry at the world that I didn't treat people with any respect. So I began to change those 3 things, and it was like a miracle happened in my life. I went from $20,000 a year to $62,000 a year in a month, and that was not supposed to happen. I didn't even know anybody that was making $62,000 a year in those days. And like the median income where I came from was like $20,000 a year. I mean, you grew up and you were a dock worker or a laborer or lower blue collar worker. So it spawned an interest in me that I knew that it didn't happen by chance or luck. I knew that there was something that I did that caused this. I just didn't know how it worked. And then you mentioned my mentor, Bob Proctor. Years later, when I found him, basically what he told me was that at that moment in time, I became an unconscious competent. And I stumbled across doing things the right way. I just didn't know what I was doing. So it spurred me on to about 7 years of study. I read everything I could get my hands on. I went to every seminar I could go to. Like one of the first seminars I went to was Tony Robbins back when he was doing Fear into Power. I mean, that's how long ago that was. And it all began to change. Things began to come together, and I slowly began to improve my life. And then I got to the point where I decided that I really felt a calling to teach this on some level. And that's when I broke out into doing that. And that's almost 20 years now. So it's been a great ride, a lot of fun, and helped a lot of people along the way.
Wow. I mean, that's an amazing story, David. And I have to relate to it as well. I myself grew up in a very sort of lower middle class area. My parents divorced when I was 13 years old, and really at that point I became involved with drugs. Ended up being institutionalized for drug addiction. So,
oh, wow.
I mean, we all go through these things, these changes in life, and I think I wouldn't call what I had a voice in my head. And I don't believe I had something called unconscious competence, but I did realize at the age of 16 and a half that I either had a choice. I was either going to be a junkie and die in my 20s, or I was going to stop everything I was doing as it related to drugs and change my life. And I decided to change my life. But ideally, it was that moment in time, that moment of despair, if you will, that brought me to that place. And it seems like you had a very similar moment.
I did. I literally had a complete emotional breakdown in the back of a trailer one night. It was I'll never forget it. It was a Tuesday night, probably about 2:30 in the morning in February in Chicago. I was exhausted. Like I said, I had been reprimanded several times that day for not doing a quality work. And I just broke down crying. I was just sobbing in the back of this trailer, like, God, please show me something, because I just don't know what to do. I don't know how to get myself out of this situation. And I think I hit, like you hit bottom. That was my bottom at the time. And I was open to hearing something different. And I was also open, probably for the first time in my life, for at least to accept some responsibility for the situation that I had gotten myself into. And that made a huge difference.
Yeah, I think that's the key, David. I think it's accepting responsibility for where you are in life, and not only just accepting the responsibility, but taking control from that point forward. Would you agree?
I absolutely agree.
Makes sense. So David, at this point, I mean, you've been through that horrible experience. You changed your attitude. You then started searching around, it seems, for things to study. Is that what happened for you?
I did. There was one step in between that had a real profound effect on me, because I was searching around and I wasn't sure where to look. I didn't know anything about self-improvement. I kind of started looking at religion in the beginning. That didn't seem to work for me so well. And I had two children, and my second was just born. This was in the late 80s, and I went on a water skiing trip for the weekend, just with my wife, to get away from everything. And I got separated from the boat. I was on the Illinois River, and I got sucked through a dam. And
what? Wait! You got sucked through a dam?
Through a dam, yeah. I sure did, in Marseilles, Illinois.
Oh.
And I was only, at that time, I was only one of two people that ever survived going through it, and the other person ended up being a quadriplegic. And when I went through it, I broke my back, not real bad, but enough that laid me up for some time. I was injured pretty bad, but I came out, I was alive, I was functionable, I had no long-term, injuries from it. But what it did do was it woke me up to the urgency of the fact that we don't know how long we're going to be here. And I found myself kind of like, I was in like this procrastination mode. Like I knew I should do something, but I didn't know what it was. And I was kind of afraid to take a step here or a step there. And that kind of solidified an urgency for me that if you're going to do something, you better do it now, because tomorrow's not guaranteed. And I think that, when you're in your 20s, you don't really think about death. You think you're going to be here forever. You're invincible at that time. You're great health. You got your youth. You feel really good. And that woke me up to like, you better pay attention, because you're definitely getting messages here that are telling you to wake up and do something, and you need to do it now for whatever that reason was. And I'm very grateful. I mean, I wasn't all that grateful in the moment, but looking back, those were pivotal moments that really made me change the direction of my thinking and choose something completely different.
See, David, I'm of the belief that we all get these messages, but don't sometimes see them. And in my opinion, whoever that might be, the universe or God, keeps knocking on that door, but sometimes he has to keep knocking louder and louder until you get sucked through a dam to finally get the message.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that's true.
Wow. I know. I had to go through basically what I did as well to get that message, to the point of being as near death as one can be. And I think everybody listening to this show has probably had some form of an experience, either a near death experience or a awakening of sorts, and a realization. The problem is that we never, I don't say collectively but many of us don't get that little voice in our head. Many of us don't know what to do. And many of us don't do anything except to just be aware of it. So here we are today, David. I mean, you've got this fantastic program and you've helped so many people. What would you say to listeners who get the idea that it's really time to do something and change something about their lives to help shift the direction and bring them to the point of where they can enjoy their lives more and be more successful?
Well, here's what I would say. The one thing, I worked with Bob Proctor for a long time, and the one thing that he drilled into me over and over and over again was the importance of making a decision, and a committed decision, not one that you're going to go back on tomorrow because it's uncomfortable, but you're drawing a line in the sand and you're saying, I'm making a decision to do this. And he would mention it to me. He would say it to me with everything, Mitch. It'd be, you just need to make a decision. You just need to make a decision. And what I have found is that people are scared to death to make a decision. They want a back door. They want to be able to have another option. Much of Napoleon Hill's book, Think and Grow Rich, was, about making a decision and not giving yourself an out, but to really push yourself through it and see what it is that you're made of, bringing out the best side of yourself. So when I'm working with a person, and one of the first things I do is get real clarity on what it is that they want, but then really get them to the point of making a decision that they're going to go after this with everything that they have, and to be willing to do what's necessary for the creation of that vision or desire that they have for themselves, and being willing to grow into it. I think at some point school kind of does us a disservice when they think, you've graduated and you don't need to really study anymore, and growth stops at high school or college or wherever it is that you get out of the educational system. But that's only the beginning. The rest of it is, who are you going to become as an adult? What are you going to do with your life? And a lot of people never really give any thought to that. They just go through life and they become whatever life throws at them, instead of saying, I'm going to take command of my life, I'm going to empower myself, and I'm going to become the person that I need to become to create the life that I desire. And that requires a decision. So that's where I bring a person first.
And that makes a lot of sense. You're basically saying, look, if you're gonna come and visit my island, then we're gonna have to burn the boats on the shore. So make sure that you can't leave.
Yeah.
And that's a great way of putting it. I think the other part you said, which is important, is this whole thing about what commencement really is. I mean, when you graduate, they call it commencement for a reason. And you're right. Most people drift at that point. I'm watching my own daughter right now. She just graduated Lesley University, magna cum laude. I'm so proud of her. But
congratulations.
Thank you. It's a dream of mine as well as a dream of hers. And, I planted that seed the day after she was born. I opened an account and put the entire cost of a college education into that account the day she was born, knowing that it would, and postulating that it would turn into a college graduate. And for me, that was a thrill to watch that entire process actually happen and unfold. And here she is. But really what I love about what I'm seeing is her desire to start. And she's even said to me things like, Dad, I know you've been paying for everything up until now, but I'm going to take it from here. And I loved when she said that, because I think that's the attitude that people have to have. They have to decide to move forward. And I think what Bob said to you and what Bob did with you was he was trying to get you to decide exactly how committed you were to moving forward.
Oh, he was, and he was ruthless about it. I mean, when I went to work with him, in a coaching relationship, he looked me right in the eye and he said, "Here's the deal. You're going to do this my way. I'm not doing it your way. Otherwise, I become your assistant. We both lose." And he said, "All I ask is that you do exactly what I tell you to do. And when you out-earn me, go do it your way." He says, "How does that sound?" And I said, "That sounds great." And, when I said that, I had no idea what I was in for, because, the man stretched me like I had never been stretched before. But I'm so grateful for him today for doing that. And I'm also grateful to myself, and I appreciate about myself that I was willing to actually make those stretches that he put in front of me. As difficult as were, as hard as they were, as much as it caused me to have to dig down deep many times and really see what I was made of and what could I do. Because when I started this, Mitch, I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know anything about the business. It's so different today than it was, 20 years ago. There was no social media. The internet was in its infancy. And it was basically knocking on doors and just, talking to anybody that would listen, getting on a stage anywhere that you could go. But it was him that really provoked me into, just get out there and do it, and you'll learn from every single experience that you have. And the only time you fail is if you quit.
Sure.
So that's what I did.
Give me some examples of the things he asked you to do, because that sounded intriguing.
Well, the first thing, and I tell this story everywhere that I go, people, sometimes they look at me like in disbelief, but he said to me, "What do you want?" And I said, "I want to be a millionaire." And of course, at that time, I was thinking that money was the answer to all my problems, right? So he said, "Okay." He said, "So here's what I want you to do." Now keep in mind, I just hired him to be my coach. I had invested just about everything that I had at the time to do that. Literally sold a boat that I had, which was one of my first goals that I ever accomplished on my own, in order to pay for coaching and seminars and that type of thing. And he says to me, "I want you to fly first class, and wherever you go somewhere, I want you to ride in the back of the car." And I said to him, "Bob, don't you think that you should teach me how to earn some money first?" And he said to me, "You want to be a millionaire, right?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Then you need to learn how to treat yourself like one first." He said, "There's no reason for you to earn the money if you don't treat yourself like a millionaire." And what he was doing was he was getting me to see myself at a much higher vision than I was seeing myself, versus coming from, okay, let's earn this, let's earn that, let's earn something else. He really catapulted my thinking into, if you see yourself at this level, you will do what's necessary to bring yourself up to that level. And he was right. He was absolutely right. I became a millionaire in a few short years. So it worked. And I have taken thousands of people through the same kind of ideology. If you treat yourself this way, if you really change that inner success image of yourself and your own self-worth, and you start treating yourself like the person that you want to become, you will also start doing the things that are required to be that person. And of course, we lay out a plan for them to do that, but it's not just throwing them to the wolves. But that was the key. That was the first thing that he did that really caused me to stretch, because he told me, he said, "You got to come to every seminar that I do, and you have to fly first class to get there." And I'm thinking, how the hell am I going to do that?
Well,
but
yeah, that's kind of crazy in a sense, because you just told me you spent all of your money to just get him to be your coach.
I did. I had a double mortgage on my house. I had every credit card, charged to the hilt. I was selling things. He said to me one time, I told him I sold my boat in order to do this, and he said to me, "What are you going to sell next? The kids?" and I didn't know what to make of it, And he said, "Why don't you stop thinking about what you have to give away to do this, and start thinking about what you can gain to do this?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah, okay." So I was involved in a couple of outside things that had the potential to make money at the time, but I wasn't really applying myself in them like I could. And that caused me to really start thinking about, okay, now how could I do this differently to start making more money? And of course, the money started coming in.
So he pushed you really, really hard to do these things that were going to take you or lead you to a place where you could make money. But what about your wife? What did she say about all of what was happening and what you were doing?
So she was very supportive as far as what I was doing. She had a lot of belief and faith in what was going on. Now, I will say that we were both scared out of our mind, right? Because this was my first introduction to anything like this, and we had a lot of people in our life that was saying this is a scam. The people that run these seminars are the only ones that make any money, and so it's kind of messing with your head, right? So we would have these discussions about them. Sometimes they would be heated discussions, sometimes not. But for overall, she was very supportive in what it was that I was doing. When it got a little bit more difficult was when I decided to walk away from my job, because I had a career working for a direct delivery petroleum company in Chicago. And I was making pretty good money, had insurance, benefits, retirement, that whole thing, working my way up in the company. Everything was great. And I just decided one day I was done and that I was going to do this for a living. And I had no idea how to do it. So I had to hit the ground, making money immediately. And it was learning on the fly. That was a little more challenging in the marriage, but we got through it.
That's fantastic. And the reason I asked the question is because I think many of us have a restrictive third party in our lives that potentially could stop us or try to stop us from moving forward, both for financial reasons and maybe for unknown reasons. Maybe they don't want things to change.
Yes, I would definitely agree with that. There, a little bit later on, it got a little bit more difficult within my marriage. I think that overall, she was very supportive. I think where I started running into problems was extended family and friends. I realized pretty quick that I had really built relationships around me that were toxic. And at first I thought to myself, because they complained about their life all the time, they would want this too. So I tried to show them what I was doing, and they just tore me to shreds over it. And after several conversations with my mentor and reading and studying, I realized that, basically all my life I had been raised in a toxic environment, and I needed to learn how to move toxic people out and bring healthy people in. And that took a little bit of time because I'm sure you recognize this from your drug days. When you're in a toxic environment, you don't necessarily know you're in one until somebody shows you something different or you hit bottom. And that's basically where I was. So I had a lot of people trying to bring me down that I just had to cut ties with and start to make new relationships.
You're right. And in my case, I was put into a program. And the habits that I learned, the habits of a successful life that I learned in that program were really at that time, and remember I was only 16 years old, really were the foundation of how I built a life from there. The sad part for me was that the main person, the guy that I bonded with, Chester, who took me through the program, after I graduated, died of a heroin overdose 90 days later.
Oh, that's sad.
Yeah. And, of course, he did his job. I mean, he basically got me through, and he got several of us through, and he was fantastic at what he did. But it was those unresolved issues inside of him that brought him back to the very place that got him to be there in the first place.
Yeah.
And I think, speaking as I just did, I think that brings us to one of the most important topics I've ever heard you talk about, and that is, what happens when we try to be successful and something stops us?
Yeah, well, that is a really good question, because I've come up against that wall a few times in my career, and I think that I have a book, and in fact, the book is sitting on my desk because I was actually teaching out of it the other day. The book is called "Working with the Law" by Raymond Hollywell. And there is something, if I may share this with you, that really got me through those times. And actually, it was Bob that turned me on to the book. I think it's a phenomenal book. But I used to keep this page open. It's just a little paragraph, if I could share this with you and your listeners.
Please.
It says, true desire represents the urge of life, seeking a fuller expression, and is kept alive by the continuous expectation of its fulfillment. It brings to us the ways and the means for its manifestation. It says the principle explains this. No desire is felt until the supply is ready to appear, and no mind can be conscious of a need or a desire unless the possibility of its fulfillment already exists. And I teach a lot about universal law, and one of my favorite laws is the law of polarity, which basically states that everything is equal and opposite. There has to be an opposite side to everything. So if you're sitting in a situation where you're stopped by something, the opposite side of that, the breakthrough, the thing that you need, the resource, the answer, the solution to a problem, not only does it exist, it has to exist in the same place as the problem. And that saved me. Because when my mind would go to a place of doubt and worry and, oh my God, how are we going to do this? And we've got these bills coming up, or a tax bill, and where are the people going to come from for this event? I would always go back to this paragraph, and it would remind me of what the truth of what we live in really is. That the way is always there if we're willing to stop thinking about how we can't and start thinking about why we can. And that's what did it. That little piece of information did it for me. One other piece was in Napoleon Hill's book when he talked about the sly disguises of opportunity and how they usually show up as misfortune or temporary defeat, and that we don't recognize the solution because we're so focused on the drama or the tragedy of the problem that is presenting itself in front of us. And that was actually how Tony Robbins helped me tremendously, because my fourth year in business, I had a $5 million embezzlement in my company. And not only did I have that, but I made a mistake in a contract, and they were able to take my entire list that I had built for 4 years.
Oh, my goodness.
And I was able to get a hold of Tony, and I talked to him because I had remembered that he went through something similar. And I thought, well, he knows how to turn this around. So I went to, I followed his advice, go to somebody who knows, right? Mm. And he was very generous, and he told me exactly how to turn it around. And I did. I turned the thing around in 12 months, and I was right back to where I was. So, I've never had a problem. If I have a problem and I don't know, I'll go to a person that does know and find out. I will refer back to that book. There's nothing that's going to stop me from fulfilling the purpose that I believe God put me here to do. And I'm just driven to make sure that that's what the context of my life really is.
Well, that's an incredible story, because I can relate to that as well. First of all, that book is sitting by my side every single day of the week. And it was a book that Steph assigned to me. And after reading it twice, and after I think most of the pages are now more yellow than white, it makes it hard. I'll start with another one soon, because there's just so many jewels inside of that book. I highly recommend it to anybody listening to go get Working with the Law by Raymond Hollywell. And I'll even put a link at the bottom of the show page so you can just click on it and get it. But, there's something important here, David, that I wanted to ask you about. One of those things that I wanted to ask you is, what happens if I don't know what my purpose is? What happens if a listener says, well, that's all well and good for you two guys who seem to know what your purpose is, but what about me?
Yeah, great question. So here's what I teach people, right? So this is a little humorous in a way, because if you were to talk about this, whenever I approach this topic with a group of people, I always preface it by saying I'm telling you this with a great amount of responsibility, because I would not go tell the average person walking down the street what I'm about to tell you. I'm telling you this because you're interested in knowing the truth, but it's dangerous if you don't follow through on it. And I tell them that desire points the way. Many years ago, I heard Tony in a seminar say, desire in its Latin root was de sire, which meant of the Father. And I believed that that God or the universe or spirit or whatever it is that you believe in does not give us these desires in our life to basically say, oh, here's all this stuff that you want, or here's these things that you want, but you can't have them, right? So you're going to be miserable for the rest of your life because you're always going to have this desire, but you never have any way of reaching it. I believe that if we had a desire, it was pointing us to something, but we're never sure what it is. And one thing always leads to another. So whenever a person says to me, I don't know what my purpose is, I ask them, what is the desire that you have for your life right now? What is the one thing that you want? I don't care if it's television or a car or a girlfriend or whatever. What is it? Because God is trying to get a message to you through that desire. And if you'll follow it, doesn't matter how crazy it may seem, it's going to come through that. Because that's how the universe speaks to us. That's how spirit speaks to us. And it's never failing. It's never wrong. I forget the guy's name. It slips my mind right now. Really great marketer, been around a long time. I was listening to him talk one time, and he said, when a person is talking about sales or marketing, their job is to sell and to market. And there's always the ethical question, should I be selling the TV and the cable stuff to the guy who's living in a trailer and basically can't pay his bills? But what if that TV and that cable brought him, one of Tony Robbins' infomercials or somebody else's infomercial that he then went out and bought the CDs for and totally changed his life, but without that information, he would have never done it. Is it then ethically wrong? And I thought, when I heard him say that, I thought, that was me. That was me coming home at 2:00 in the morning after driving a forklift and seeing Tony on TV pitching his tapes with Fran Tarkenton and thinking to myself, for 3 easy payments of $29.95 or whatever it was at the time, and 3 times I got up out of the chair with a credit card to go buy him and thought, oh man, what if I make a mistake? What if I make a mistake? And finally, I just went ahead and did it. And it was that opened the door and started to change my life. So it's, if a person follows the message that they're getting, no matter how crazy it may sound, but keep following it all the way through, they're going to find what that purpose is. And I also tell people, I say, look, if God came down and showed you, if you fully did everything that you could in this lifetime, what you could achieve, you wouldn't believe it anyway, because it would be so grand. You'd be thinking to yourself, that's not me. And if you showed me what I do now and what I have done back when I was driving a forklift, I wouldn't have believed it either. I'd have been like, no way. There's just no way that could possibly be me. So we get our purpose one piece at a time as we grow into it. And we do that by following the desire of our heart and stepping into the requirement that also brings the growth as we step into that piece.
I totally get what you're saying. I even without realizing it or understanding it, I've exercised this on my own. I remember once when I was running a sales team, I brought a very promising young man onto my team, and I knew how good he could be, but he didn't. So what I did is I took him over because he admired my car. At the time I had a BMW. So I brought him over to the BMW dealer, and I told him to pick one out. And he goes, well, what do you mean? I am driving like an old Toyota. I don't care. I want you to pick out a brand new BMW, and I want you to sign up for payments for it right now. This episode is brought to you by OscarHamilton.com, who edit and produce all of our podcast episodes. They have a great range of services for podcasters at all levels. They can help you set up your podcast, but also offer a couple of excellent services to help you edit your shows and get them up with great show notes. Check them out at OscarHamilton.com. He said to me, but I can't afford it. I said, I don't care whether you can afford it. You will, because I know how good you are, and you need to know how good you are. So I want you to buy the BMW today. And he did. And that led him, I don't think the exact incident, him buying the BMW, led him to be one of the best salesmen I ever hired, but it led him to understand how good he really was. And I think he needed a little prodding for me
Yeah.
to get him to that point. But I want to challenge you on something, David, because I think a lot of people have desire. A lot of people will say, you know what? I've wanted this for years. I've suffered without it for decades. Don't tell me that desire points the way to how I can get it. I don't know how to find it. What do you say to that, David?
What are you resisting not doing?
Aha. So you would ask yourself, what are you resisting not doing? So that
Right.
really is the pathway, because there is something that people are always resisting not doing. Is that right?
It is. Yeah, absolutely. And like you said before, it could be that maybe a spouse would be upset. They're afraid to spend the money. They're afraid that they don't trust themselves. A lot of times people have committed themselves to doing something over and over and over again and not followed through. They're afraid to commit to something bigger because they don't trust that they'll actually follow through on it. But whatever it is, they're resisting not doing something, and that's keeping them from exposing the fulfillment of that desire in their life.
So what happens if somebody thinks about that and says, well, you know what? I'm not resisting something. I'm resisting everything. I mean, where do you start? Because I know people. Look, I'm 63 years old, David, and I've been in business a long time, and I know a lot of very smart people, and I know some of them who've had successful lives but lost it. And at this point,
Sure.
They're kind of stuck not knowing what to do. And it feels to me they've had so many losses, they've tried so many things that nothing has ever worked. So how does someone like that go about getting to the next step, whatever that might be?
Well, I think there's two questions there. One, the first one is if somebody said I'm resisting everything, what I would do is I would break it down to the ridiculous. I would say I don't care about everything. Tell me one thing that you want.
Right.
That's it. I don't want to know everything. I want to know one thing that you want. And then what are you resisting around that one thing? And get them to take action on that one thing. Start the breakthrough off small and then build upon that. For the person that is on the other side of that, who has had multiple failures in their life, I would sit down and talk to them about, number one, why did they go after the things that they went after, right? Because there's a lot of reasons why people go after things. If it's not something that they really want to do, if it's out of some other obligation, or if it's out of some childhood story, or some guilt or shame that they had around with their parents, of course, that could cause a complete catastrophe in there. Well, not could, it will. There's just no question about it because it's circular. It's going to come back around. But I would sit down and ask them, what is it that you really want? If money wasn't an option, if you didn't have to care about what anybody thought about what you want to do, what is it that you would do? Just between you and I, what would it be? And when that truth comes out, they usually break into tears, and that's the thing. They've been chasing something else for some wrong reason all of their life, and that's why it doesn't work. But if they really tap in and be honest with themselves, that thing is there because there's nothing in nature that's not born with a purpose. It's just about pulling it out of that person, and if they're willing to go into be a little bit vulnerable, be a little self-honest with themselves, and really sit down and look you straight in the eye and say, here's what I would really want. If money wasn't an issue, if I didn't have to worry about people with thought, this is what I would do.
So you're saying the path to your purpose starts with what it is that you want.
Yeah.
Then step 2 would be to ask yourself, what am I resisting around not having what it is that I want?
That's correct.
And then from there, by simply letting go of that resistance and actually moving forward, you're taking that first step towards getting what it is that you truly, really want. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. Well, that sounds like a pretty easy formula, David. Why is it so hard for people to do that?
Because we're taught too many rules that don't make any sense around that idea. Basically, we're taught that life is hard. It's not easy. And, that was financially the first breakthrough that I had. Bob used to have this thing where he would say to people, how would you like to take your annual income and make it your monthly income? And I remember you sitting in his seminars before I even knew him, and I would think to myself, oh my God, that would be so fantastic if I could do that. Like every problem in the world would be solved. And when it got to the point where I was working with him and I actually had the opportunity to do that, his whole demeanor completely changed with me, and the line of questioning changed. And the things that he was saying changed because he never taught me how to make money, which was fascinating because Bob's a money guy. And what he did was he removed all the reasons in my mind why I couldn't make money, and then the money was there. It was bizarre, but it works. So he said to me this. He said, David, making $50,000, because I was making $50,000 a year at the time. He said, making $50,000 a month is easier than making $50,000 a year. And I would set this goal, and I would for a month, and I would go after it. At the end of the month, I would be no closer than I was the month before. And then I would talk to him on the phone, and he would say, "How'd you do?" And I'd be like, "I'm not even close." And he would say, he would go, I wouldn't even get out of bed for $50,000. And you work all year for it? Why are you working so hard? And he was trying to get me to actually realize that I was making it difficult when it was easy. So that went on for 3 months. The third month, I broke through that, and I never went back again. It's always increased since then. But once I got that out of my head, that I was making it difficult, all of a sudden, it wasn't just with money, Mitch. It was with my whole life. I saw how I was making everything hard because that's how I was raised. So I'm being loyal to the teaching of my parents. Life is hard. Life sucks. And you die. That whole type of stuff. And that's the life that I was living at the time. But then when I realized it could be easier, I realized how much fun and joy and how miraculous your life could actually be. And it really has been a great ride ever since then. Not that I haven't had problems, I have, but you even deal with your problems from a place of, well, this is easy. It's just a problem. We can fix this. We can overcome it. We can go around it. We can change it, whatever. It's not something that stops you anymore.
Yep, I totally get that. I was raised in a house by a dad who grew up in the Depression, who had to melt lead out of milk containers in order to buy 3 ears of corn for an entire family for dinner. So wow. You can imagine what I was raised in. I mean, my father was the most frugal man in the universe, but he so focused on making money as he grew up that, I got both sides of that. I got his entrepreneurial skills, but I also got that mindset, which I've fought all my life.
Yeah, definitely. I think that there's something to be said for the ingenuity of the people that grew up in a time where most people didn't have anything, because it taught you to be resourceful. And there's a lot that we can learn from that. In a lot of ways, I think that we give kids way too much these days because they don't learn how to become resourceful.
I totally agree with that. And, again, I watch as I see my friends raise their children, and, they call them helicopter moms. Well, there's plenty of helicopter dads out there, too, who hover over their children, trying to solve every problem they have and never let them learn how to solve problems on their own. And as a result, they don't know how.
Right.
Well, that's just wrong. And I've never done that with my daughter. I always let her tackle the issue best that I can. And for the most part, it seems to have proven out that she's a good problem solver and she could fix things when she has to. But it's a hard thing for someone raised in a Depression family. That's what I was saying.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of mindset around that for sure.
Well, you talk a lot about mindset in all of your work, and you I think, help people understand the unconscious decisions that they make that are leading to very conscious outcomes. Where would you start if we were going to help somebody literally brand new who was just being introduced to your work? What would be the first place we should send them today on this show to get more information about you and about your work, and maybe even get a little bit of knowledge from you on this process?
Well, so that's a really great question. The number one, they can actually go to my website, and they can go to, so it's davidneagle.com, DAVIDNEAGLE.com, and they can download a free 6-step guide to overcoming obstacles. And it's really mind expanding as far as everything that's in a person's life for the reason that they think that they can't do something. So that's where I would direct a person for what I do to start with me.
That's a great suggestion. I've watched the video series on your website as well. I think it's absolutely fantastic and gives people a great idea of who you are. At the same time, it provides a lot of great information. And again, I want to echo your suggestion about the book, Working with the Law. That's just such a fantastic book. And I think if people take the $5 and spend it on that book, it will pay them back many, 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 many times. So it's another great suggestion. Well, David, today has been a very special show for me. It's different than the shows that I've done before, but it's an important show because I think for many, it's a pathway out. It's a way to get people to the next step, whatever that might be. So I want to say thank you so much, David, for your time today. It's really been a pleasure.
Mitch, thank you so much. I've had a wonderful time. Thanks for having me on your show.
You've been listening to Your First 1,000 Clients with your host, Mitch Russo. Go to www.yourfirst1000clients.com for a free guide on how to get 1,000 of your own clients. And if you like this episode, please go to iTunes and subscribe, rate, and review.